Hi guys, my name's Connor. I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran, and I am a Never Trump Republican. Meaning, somebody asked me, what's a Never Trump Republican? And I said, or I thought, it is a Republican who hates the current Republican Party. It's the principles of republicanism, divorced from the current political machine, which is very sad. But anyways, I have fire content for you today. This is Lance from the Serfs versus Jesse Singal. Jesse Singal is a heterodox liberal who talks about gender issues. Therefore, he pisses off all of the far lefties. And then I'm just going to be mean to Lance from the Serfs, and I'm just going to say that he's a political commentary leftist midwit. And so he oftentimes gets himself into trouble through not understanding what words mean, but virtue signaling about said words. So we're going to go ahead and watch these two people battle it out. It should be fun. I'll be pausing intermittently to break it down. Let us enjoy the psychic damage together.
Time to join me. Do you want to quickly tell our audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my name's Lance. I'm a, I suppose, comedian from Canada who covers news, politics, tries to make it entertaining. But like most people who spend a lot of time on the internet, obviously waste a little bit too much of my life on slop and other brain-rotting material.
As do we all. Yeah, so this, I explained in the intro, but this talk came about because, you know, you were somewhat critical of me and some of the stuff I've written and said about youth gender medicine. And Katie and I have found that often when people criticize us, they're unwilling to then have a conversation. So I appreciate that. I'm going to let you sort of take the reins here. I will say to your audience, there was a miscommunication. I didn't expect this to be video. I look a little bit haggard from 4th of July drinking and a little bit of illness. So be merciful. But other than that, take it away.
Yeah, so I obviously have some pretty strong critiques of your work, and you know, I'm quite excited to have the opportunity to bring them up in person. I figured we'd use the infamous article that you published in The Atlantic, the cover story when kids say they're trans, kind of as a jumping off point, so we can go through it. And I'm pretty sure you'll probably hear a lot of these critiques before, but I went through the article again and reread the entire thing and wanted to kind of just break down each piece of it. And in the article, obviously, you spoke to a lot of people who had detransitioned, including Claire, Max Robinson, Carrie Stella, Carrie Callahan, and Delta. And for about the first 9,000 words of the piece, there's not really a single example of a well-adjusted or happy trans person who had gone through the process. Obviously, the examples that you use, starting with Claire, for example, you often invoke the fact that they had been suffering from depression, and that you believe, or at least the testimonies are leading you to believe, that this has something to do with outside influences that had somehow impacted their decision to want to transition in the first place. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I think you're lifting that language almost directly from Slate. The way Slate put it was, as the piece goes on, notably without a single happy, well-adjusted trans scene among its host of central characters for the first 9,000 plus words.
So this is where lefty analysis kind of divorces from reality, which is effectively like, you must have the message at all times. And for those of you who are unaware, the message is a meme from actually quite an annoying video reviewer named The Critical Drinker. I still watch The Critical Drinker every now and then because I feel like his criticisms can be insightful, although his constant negativity, even on fun media, is kind of like off-putting after a while, where you're like, at what point are we just not being assholes to be assholes? But the message is effectively like rabid progressivism. That's the message. And so if like the way that Lance would want Jesse Singal to write a piece about trans kids who detransitioned because they weren't really trans, they got caught up in the gender affirming machine, and then as a result they were actually misdiagnosed and went through a lot of like medical issues. Like, the way that he would want that to go down is, first, a land acknowledgement that we live on stolen land, then an acknowledgement of the genocide in Gaza because there's something going on that's more important than anything else we discuss. Then, the fact that 99.9% of all trans kids are perfectly happy with their identities, and therefore gender affirming care is the correct way to go, regardless of any evidence that might be contradictory. And then finally, you could have a few interviews with detransitioners. That's how Lance from the Serfs would like that piece to have been written. That's how progressives would have liked that piece to have been written. And Jesse Singal did not follow that formula and therefore is in trouble with the leftists. Puzzlehead says, anyone watch Sagar Tucker interview? No, I have a feeling that's insufferable, but maybe that's why we should add it to the docket list. Sagar versus Tucker. Do they just like laugh back and forth at each other about how dumb the war in Ukraine is? Sagar Tucker. Excuse me. Sapien says, why listen to the Serfs? If I want to listen to a R slur, I'll talk to myself. For the psychic damage and the memes. Mr. October says, Lance Ass is still on YouTube. Yep. Rob says, apparently Grok has been doing some racisms. Yeah, I know. It's pretty funny. Gen X says, good morning. Good morning to you, Gen X. John says, Drinker is a grifter. I don't know if he says things he doesn't believe. He could just be an idiot. But if you mean that he's like constantly capitalizing on negativity surrounding media, yeah. I mean, what was the thing? He did like a Warhammer 40K criticism about female custodies that was like way off. He had no idea what he was talking about. Sapien Green says, Grok is the offspring of an African, so it can use the N-word. Oh, Lawson says, quick 20-second side quest. In and out. 20-minute side adventure. Morty, don't worry about it. Oh, my God. All right. Back to it. Sorry, I'm engaging with chat more than I should right now because I know how painful this is going to be. Oh, Tiger Roon says, a lot of people on the right get cruel about the trans stuff, but internal critiques from the left are way harder to dismiss, which is why they get such savage pushback. Yeah, and Jesse Singal has been called out as like a particularly virulent transphobe, despite being like a liberal and a progressive on the topic. Yeah. All right. Oh, True Zealot says, number one, Shadow 2 Bravo says, Sagar and Tucker makes me want to sunset myself. Well, we'll check that out for sure then. True Zealot says, introduced the Serfs without mentioning the mass graves debate. You and Lauren Southern crushed him in. You're a better person than me. No, I'm not. Right before we get back into the content, I know I'm screwing up the flow of the content, but Lauren Southern and I and the Serfs, and then this guy is Lance from the Serfs, the Serfs and Tale of Twin Rabbits, we had a debate about like indigenous genocide and church burnings several years ago. And the general consensus is that Lance and his friend got so destroyed terribly. And it was so bad. The internet backlash to the left side of that debate was so bad that Tale of Twin Rabbits like left the internet for like 90 days in the wake of that debate.
There's a lot of trans adults cited further up in the story, but because of the structure of the story, yeah, I think it's trans adults. I wouldn't call Delta like a full-blown detransitioner. I'd call her a desister, but yeah, I think some of the detransitioners are higher up than the Orion Foss, and there was another kid who was sort of a happily transitioned young person. So yeah, in terms of the structure of it, I think that's mostly true.
So yeah, Slate's one of the many articles that I had to read to basically see the opposing sides that have already been brought up in relation to you. But I wanted to go a couple steps further. So I actually broke down each one of their stories in words themselves, which that article didn't have. So Claire, it's 1,312 words related to her personal story. Max Robinson, 1,086 words related to.
Are we not allowed to document the stories of trans people? What the fuck is this point?
Her personal story. Carrie Stella, 100 words. Carrie Callahan, 530 words. Delta, 569 words. So that's approximately 3,600 words for all of the detransitioning stories. And then at the very end, there's what I considered, I suppose, the more positive stories. Scott Padberg, which he, him, 569 words. And then Orion Floss, he, him, which is 584.
Lawson says, Connor, I posted the link to the funniest part of that debate from Destiny's POV. I don't know if links in YouTube chat is a thing, though. Yeah, so if you can DM it to me on Twitter, Counterconor, COUNTERCONOR, that's probably the easiest way to do it. I think we have links disabled on YouTube, so I'm not able to see if you posted a link in YouTube, I'm not able to see it.
So the bulk of the article is dedicated to telling the stories of detransitioners and oftentimes highlighting things, not only that they had suffered depression, but in some cases that they had been sexually assaulted. In the case of Max Robinson, it talks about how she was raped at 13 years old. And then you felt necessary to include that at 14, she had watched her friend be sexually assaulted by another man. And then obviously bring up the depression and anxiety disorder that she experienced. And then in that case, as well as others such as hers and Claire's, there's obviously the implication that, so for Max Robinson, it was that she was watching the Tyra Banks show and that she'd seen a sex worker, Buck Angel, talking about transition that influenced her decision. In Claire's case, it was a YouTuber. But this seems to be a frequent theme that you were highlighting between all of them. And I think my big point here is that on a topic of which the rates of transition and detransition are becoming clearer and clearer with more and more studies that come out, and obviously in terms of detransition, the rates are quite low. You chose to focus primarily.
That's not
well,
true.
we'll get to.
Number one, I don't think Lance is smart enough in order to actually convey the information relevant to this topic. Number two, I'm pretty sure I know that Jesse is. And so this is probably going to be a bloodbath.
Get to this part, right? We'll get to the part where we can go back and forth and we can talk about study after study. But even in the article itself, right, you mentioned that, there's one study that references that detransition rates are very low at 2%. However, we can't truly know. I think what you've done here is effectively use a lot of anecdotal evidence as well as selective interviews to try and highlight a narrative that you yourself are trying to craft, which is that in each one of these cases, we have people who had been influenced by outside sources, oftentimes had experienced severe trauma. And then for a reader who had never or doesn't know anything about this topic, if they come across this article and this is their introduction to.
You know what? I'm not going to lie. I viciously dislike the Serfs' politics. He's been personally nice to me, so I feel bad being mean to him. But I think this guy's been mewing, I think he's been mewing. Look at that jawline. His face is like a frickin' rectangle. Good for him. Like we can hate on the Lance. We can hate on Lance for a variety of reasons. We can think he's a blockhead. We can think he's not particularly intelligent. We can make fun of his perspectives. We can make fun of him trying to struggle session people in the year of our Lord 2025. But you know what? Look at that jaw. It's like a perfect L shape. So I'll go ahead and congratulate him on that.
To trans people and the concept of transitioning, for example, they're going to come away with a article where the vast majority and the bulk of it really shows that this is something in which people are either doing because of social contagions, peer pressure, and potentially even sexual assault or forms of depression and anxiety.
I'm going to phrase this as a question, though. So I know Gay Zach, the guy that I had a friend in high school. I know that he had a formative homosexual abusive experience. I probably know half a dozen to a dozen girls who had sex abuse as very young, like early teens, something like that. Either a cousin or an adult figure in their lives or whatever, like sex abuse them, and then that just correlated. I'm not saying it was the cause, but it correlated with promiscuity and antisocial sexual behaviors. So I'm kind of asking this more as a question to my gay audience members. Do you have a formative sex abuse experience that or like a traumatic early childhood sex abuse experience or like early adolescence sex abuse experience or not? Because my suspicion would be that there are people who are just genetically gay, right? Like they're just born gay. They've always been gay. There's nothing going on. But the correlates with sex abuse, I would actually want to check out, because obviously we want to minimize sex abuse as maximally as possible. But if Lance was correct, that Jesse Singal was trying to correlate sex abuse along with exposure to gender nonconforming people as predictive of detransitioner people getting confused. I think that's a topic worth exploring. Obviously, it's like highly sensitive, but I would want to take a look at it, basically. Philip Coffey says, Lance on 9/11. There are lots of good, moral, life-affirming Muslims all over the world, and there was also a couple of plane crashes. The Donic Treadmill says, Lance claims to be a comedian. I thought I was hallucinating. What a joke. Well, maybe that was one of his jokes. You know, he made you laugh, so he is a comedian. KO Dave says, oh, yay, the trans debate, because good things always come from this. Well, the good news is that Lance, I think, is representative of the hyper woke internet perspective, and Jesse Singal is representative of the heterodox liberal perspective. So I think this is actually going to be, I think it's going to be fine. Cameron Mosley says, Lance is an F slur, R slur. Very rude of you. Lawson Harrison says, I don't have Twitter, but I sent it to you on Discord. Perfect. Ensort says, Lance is severely out of his depth here. What does he know about trans stuff? He knows how to repeat talking points, so that'll be very useful to him and his audience. Tagarung says, don't compliment the serfs. It makes me nauseous. Well, you know, I got to be nice some of the time. Thank you, baby. Thank you. I asked for my wife to check on me and to bring me some water because I was going to be super dehydrated if she didn't. Sin Patty says, Lance doesn't know what he had for breakfast this morning, let alone about trans issues. Yeah, but how does he feel? How does he feel since he doesn't remember his breakfast? Tagrung says, remember, Connor, our ideological enemies are axiomatically evil. No, I know you're memeing. However, I'm going to go ahead and say in this community, because I feel like the Vosh Destiny acts out the my opponents are axiomatically evil. He just acts it out. He doesn't say it. He just does it. Vosh did the axiomatically evil or ontologically evil, therefore there's no bad things that I can do it. And it like festered in the far left to the point that now they're like cheering on like rape and death and murder and terrorism. So even as a joke, I think we're going to reject the ontologically evil memes. Jonah Zilla says he should just drag his finger across his jaw instead of making an argument. Yes. All right, let's continue.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a 700 or 800 word bit at the top of the story above all the stuff you're talking about, or most of it, that talks about transition working and how there's been a long history of trans people not having access to it. So I guess I just question who would read the story and come away confused about my stance on like whether some people should have access to this medicine. I think in some cases I was a little bit. Say again?
That wasn't my assertion. I said that you're crafting a narrative here for a first person or a first time reader on this topic who's going to walk away thinking that the majority of people who undergo transitioning eventually do detransition because the bulk of this is concentrating on, again.
But how would they come to that conclusion if I don't say that?
Because they would only read the first half of the article because they're stupid assholes.
Oh, because so as a journalist, and this is why I think that you are particularly crafting what you do, it's not simply that you need to report on facts. I think that should be just the bare minimum, right? That you should be able to report factually on things that actually occur. But you are also crafting a narrative in what you choose to report on and what you choose to highlight and what you choose to actually bring a lot of attention to. And in the case of your story, I would say, again, the overwhelming majority is spent on people who had experienced severe trauma, depression, perhaps even sexual assault or rape.
And if that's factually true, what's the problem?
As children, and then at which point they had chosen to detransition, and you include that in the story to kind of craft the narrative so people reading it will then assume that or infer it.
Oh, he used infer properly. So I hope Gen X, if she's listening, she understands that the serfs used infer properly.
I think what I want people, what I was trying to get at with the article is that this is complicated. And when you're talking about young people and physical transition, especially permanent things like hormones, and I would argue puberty blockers shouldn't be considered reversible like they have been for a while. I think I might have even called them reversible in that. I don't think that's accurate anymore. I think it's complicated. And there's a big difference between a kid who has felt gender dysphoric their whole life and then is approaching puberty. I think a kid like that should be handled really differently from a kid like Max Robinson, where it comes on after a trauma. And what I've had trouble getting a straight answer from critics is like, it seems unlikely to me that you think gender identity exists in this sort of separate realm where it's totally separate. Or totally detached from someone's peer influence, from cultural influence, from trauma. So to me, like if you read the article, you will see some more complicated cases because that's what the article was about. But it shows a range of outcomes. Now, data-wise, we don't know like how many people detransition. The most well-known researcher on this is a trans guy named Kinnan McKinnon. He says, depending on the study you look at, I forget the exact range he gave, but it can be anything from 5 to 20%. I think it's probably not as high as 20%. It also depends how you define it. Unfortunately, in this article, this was 7 years ago now, but I said detransition was rare. I don't stand by that. I think we basically, in part because trans people since like the 1950s have been getting fucked over and not had a lot of good research done on trans medicine. I think we don't know what the detransition rate is, especially for kids who didn't go through sort of the normal clinical process of the Dutch protocol, which involves a lot of therapy, a lot of talking through, a lot of discussing comorbidity. So if you have data, setting aside the fact this article is from 2018, if you have data showing like a reliable detransition rate, I'm all ears. I just haven't seen it.
Okay. If you don't mind, can we get to that after this part? Because I wanted to kind of compartmentalize each one of these. So if we're still speaking about these.
Okay, I'm happy to, but let me just make one minor complaint, which is like if your whole thing is like I'm disproportionately focusing on X rather than Y, and my answer is, well, we don't know how X common is. You can understand, but
I totally agree with you, and I think that's a fair thing for me to have to disprove. So I've got a breadth of studies that I eventually wanted to start talking about, and
so then he's going to study bomb him. And what's interesting is we were talking about this yesterday with Decoding the Gurus. Is where is it? The lazy gardener is referring to things without the understanding. I don't want to get into the weeds and doesn't want to present solid evidence to reinforce your claims. This could be argued to be the lazy gardener. That's funny. And then decorative scholarship. I think they reference decorative scholarship as well, where Lance is saying like, oh yeah, I've read all these studies, but then he's not able to refer to them on the fly, which I think is awesome. I think it's awesome that we were watching content yesterday and we already have a couple of references to it. Fantastic. Although, to be fair, Lance is accusing Jesse Singal of debate edging, where he's implying through description but never making prescriptions. The only problem with this is that Jesse Singal will come out and tell you what he thinks. So, lol.
But then we move away from this topic, and you actually ask the question that, could you also ask that question a little bit later as well? Because I want to answer it firsthand, because, anytime you're like, I haven't seen a single one of my critics capable of answering or responding to this, I think that it's important to actually unpack those. But maybe it would be easier if we had a baseline of some.
So the study bomb, KO Dave, the reason why I would call it that and say like, oh, he asked for it. So what people are typically asking for, though, when it comes to evidence is, just as an example, let's say that I take up a position, which is effectively that 80% of casualties, 90% of casualties within the global war on terror in Iraq were not caused by coalition forces. Well, you can say, what's your source for that? And I can say, it's the Iraq Body Count Project. And then you can go look at that and we can confirm that what I'm saying is true. And that's a relatively straightforward process. However, if I say, well, there's a study from the Lancet that estimates 1 million. There's a study from US News that's around 500,000. There's a study from this place that's 200,000. And there's a study from this place that says 300,000. But realistically, they don't track all the perpetrators. And then the Iraq Body Count Project does track the perpetrators, but here's all the problems with it, blah, 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 blah. Well, effectively what it seems like you're doing is you're gish galloping the opponent, which gish gallop is another debate term. You're overloading your statements with so much information that it ultimately becomes not translatable in reference to the debate. So I would view you, KO Dave, you can correctly say that Jesse asked for the information. However, I would say the lazy gardener technique is still being employed here, unless Lance says, actually, this study from Scandinavia, which has been replicated by this study out of the UK, shows that the detransition rate is less than 10% with an average of 8%. Then at that point, I would not consider him a lazy gardener. I would consider him an actual gardener. And I wouldn't consider that decorative scholarship. I would actually consider that just scholarship.
We can both agree with, so that I can actually try and see where the point of contention is. Would you agree with the assertion that, for example, homosexuals, gay people, were stigmatized heavily as being potential predators and pedophiles as a way of trying to
Okay, and
they still are. There's been a resurgence of that.
And do you agree that the majority of sexual offenders are cis heterosexual men?
I hate this. I hate this. I hate this so much, dude. Per capita. Dude, per capita. Per capita. Okay? Per capita. Per capita. All right. For those of you who don't understand why I just screamed like a monster who was being slowly killed, and for those of you who didn't look at the screen when I Googled per capita and said the word per capita 8 times, per capita means that you can isolate discrete populations. Let's say that cis heterosexual white people are 90% of the population, and let's say that gay people are 10% of the population, okay? And let's say 60% of sex crimes are committed by cis white heterosexual people. I don't know why I added white, but whatever. And let's say 40% is committed by homosexuals. Well, since heterosexual cis people are 90% of the population, that means that they're actually on a per capita basis underperforming with their correlate within the population for sex crimes, whereas the homosexual population would be overperforming by 4%. Now, the reason why this is evil from the right-wing perspective is because they say, oh, well, this population overperforms within this kind of crime, therefore they're all evil, so we're going to treat all of them like shit, which is obviously very, very, very stupid. Because let's use black homicide statistics because that's the most common one, is that 13% of the population commits half of the homicides within the United States because the black community is 13% of the population. Well, when you actually isolate it down, it's not 13% because half of the population of black men or of the black population is women, and women are not committing the vast majority of homicides. So it's actually 6%. And then within that 6%, it's not males over the age of 40 and it's not males under the age of 12. It's actually males aged 12 to 40. So it's not, so you can eliminate those discrete populations. It's basically young men. And then furthermore, within the young men category, 90 to 95% of young men do not engage in homicide. So it's actually like a very small criminal subset of a population that's overperforming within the metric. So you should isolate that element, and then you should study it, and you should see what social programs and what law enforcement programs actually disincentivize homicide. That would be the way that you would do it if you were an honest actor. But the right wing doesn't do that. But I would view the left wing obfuscating statistics by not understanding per capita is very dumb. And it feels disingenuous, especially when the right wing has pointed out to you per capita 10,000 times. So let's do, let's just verify what Lance is saying real quick. The, what is it? Sex crimes by sexual orientation statistics. This is going to piss me off. I'm already angry. But, well, that woke me up. Sexual violence victimization. I don't know if this is going to give us the information that we want, but for example, nearly 80% of bisexual women and over 56% of bisexual men have reported experienced contact sexual violence in their lifetimes. Okay, 3 in 5 lesbian women and gay men have also reported experienced contact sexual violence. This is domestic violence. In contrast, just over half of heterosexual women are, and about 3 in 10 heterosexual men have reported contact sexual violence. Oh, I guess this might be rape, right? So for rape, 80% of bisexual women have experienced either sexual assault or rape, and 56% of bisexual men have reported some kind of sexual assault or rape. So this would point out, and this isn't to vilify the gay community or the queer community. I don't give a shit. You know, this is bad no matter what. If a heterosexual does it, incarcerate them. If a homosexual does it, incarcerate them. If a bisexual person does it, incarcerate them. I don't care who you are. But the truth is that it seems like sexual assault and rape is overrepresented in the queer community. And then perpetrators of sex crimes. Studies indicate that most perpetrators of child molestation are heterosexual. Only about 21% of perpetrators who assault boys are homosexual. But what is the homosexual population of the United States percentage? .6. So that's a 300% representation when it comes to sex crimes, like homosexual sex crimes. So again, this isn't to vilify gay people, but it is to be descriptively accurate. Holy shit. I'm not going to engage with chat because we'll be here forever, but I hope you appreciate my psychic damage because that hurt me. That hurt my feelings a lot.
Are cis heterosexual men?
Yes.
Probably.
The majority of sexual
That's
offenders.
the majority of
Per capita.
people.
I'm just going to say per capita every time he brings this up. And if he brings it up repeatedly, he's actually going to drive me fucking insane. As a matter of fact, Lance, you owe me $2 for watching your dog shit point.
Most offenders are male and most males are cis. Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah.
Okay, so granted that, if I wrote an article in which I was interviewing the victims of sexual assault, and I focused primarily on the victims of sexual assault who had been assaulted by homosexuals, even though they were telling their stories, this actually happened, and it was 100% factually true, do you understand then that I would be crafting a narrative that would further stigmatize homosexuals because I was focusing primarily, even though they were the minority of the offenders, I was crafting a narrative that when people read that story, they would read the personal testimonies of multiple people who had been assaulted and then walk away from that perhaps more frightened, contributing then to the stigmatization of gay people.
Okay, but if it's statistically true that gay people are represented at a 300% rate, you should still talk about that because the truth matters. LB says 80% of violent crimes are committed by men. No, I don't give a shit about that. You're going to be mad? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Men are more violent than women, obviously.
So just to make the analogy fit, in this hypothetical article, you'd also interview people who are sexually assaulted by cis men.
No, well, we're not doing cis or trans here. I'm doing heterosexual or homosexual. But yes, I would interview, say, 6 people who had been sexually assaulted by homosexuals, and then 1 person who had been sexually assaulted by a heterosexual.
Sorry, I have to pay attention to the content, but I want to address any pushback in chat. Rob says, to push a little, would you also agree that if you had a random sample of the population, if you get an offender, they're more likely to belong to the dominant group? Yes, of course. The numbers you read weren't per capita. It was actual abuse statistics. LB. You're the meme right now. So who cares if they're gay? Abuse is abuse. I said that. So don't argue with me in chat like we're disagreeing when we're not.
I mean, if your article was just about sexual assault and how common it is, I would find that odd. I think this analogy fails for a number of reasons. One of which is this is a pretty new medical protocol that's been around since 2008-ish, or Dutch did it a little bit earlier, and we don't know much about it. So I think if you're writing about a new thing where you don't know the base rates, I guess I'm just confused as to what in my Atlantic article you would find to be stigmatizing of trans people. Like what is
that all trans people, well, not all trans people, but a substantive amount of trans people aren't actually trans, that they were actually just sexually abused and confused by pop culture. I think that's what the accusation from progressives would be.
Quote in my article that you think cast aspersions on trans people, the trans experience.
But just to be clear, you would agree that if I did that, that was demonstrating that I, as the person who's writing the article, the journalist in this case, was distinctly trying to push a narrative.
Sure, but he said it was disanalogous.
And
I'm going to start lifting weights, because if I don't lift weights, I think my heart might actually explode in my chest, and my blood pressure spike might actually explode a capillary behind my eye socket. And so in order to avoid imminent cardiovascular related death, I'm going to lift weights while listening to this. Holy shit.
in order to fearmonger towards homosexuals that there are higher rates, I would disproportionately be crafting a narrative that isn't true in doing so. Just in my personal example, I'm not talking about your article. Just to finish that analogy.
Well, yeah, but you're trying to draw an analogy. I disagree with the analogy, but sure, yeah, I'll get that. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, again, you're asking a question that I've already answered, because I think if you write an article in which the bulk of the article talks about the negative experiences that cis people have experienced, especially detransitioners who went through the process, anyone who walks away from reading that article where the vast majority of the words are spent interviewing people who had negative experiences are going to think that the overwhelming amount of trans people who undergo transitioning experience a negative effect. The majority of the article is spent on interviewing it, right? There's only two people that you've interviewed in the article. Again, Scott Padberg, Orion Floss, who, by the way, both happen to be he, him. I'm also curious as to why every single person who's a detransitioner was a woman. Was that just the people who had been responding, or was that a personal choice?
You're asking whether detransitioners or the happily transitioned are
biological females. Yeah, so the detransitioners, aka people who are cis and always were cis, are all women, every single one of them. And then the people who I could say are close.
I don't know, Lance. Is there something that's worth studying about social contagion theory related to gender differences that leads to women who were always cis transitioning and then later regretting their transition? Should we study that, or is that vilifying trans people?
Closest to happily transitioned trans people are both men, are both he, him. Was that an editorial decision, or was that just
in other words, so everyone involved was a natal female?
That's not my question. My question is, again, so the majority of people that you chose,
you're saying there were two happily transitioned people, and they were both trans guys.
Yeah, they were both men.
Of the two, they were both. No, I mean there was no. I mean that's just like who the best stories were. There's also, if you go to a youth gender clinic today, 70 to 80% of the people at that clinic for youth services will be natal female. So it makes sense that's who you would find if you look for some kids to talk to.
So it wasn't a decision on your part. It was simply how this worked out.
How it shook out. Yeah.
Okay, understanding. Did you get to pick the photos that were used, out of curiosity? The pictures? Did you have any editorializing on that?
Oh my God. LB, you got to work with me here, okay? Well, QC John says, good morning, Connor in chat. Friendly reminder that God made iron workers so carpenters have heroes. True. LB says, who, Connor? That's not how math works, and that wasn't a per capita study. Okay. We're going to do this just for you. Homosexual abuse statistics Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the exact one. So that you should be able to figure this out, LB. If you can't figure this out after this rant, then I don't think I'm going to be able to help you out. Okay, so the Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that the rate of violence victimization for lesbian or gay individuals was more than twice that of straight individuals. Okay, so I'm going to do this for you. What is the gay population of the United States percentage? I think they said it was 7. I'm probably going to round it up to 10. Okay, so let's just say it's 10. I'm literally going to bust out a fucking Excel spreadsheet for you. drive.google.com. If you don't understand it at this time, after I explain this, then you are the fucking meme. Okay? So let's just say that there's 100 million people in the United States. 100, 100,000. That's the number. Okay. Where's the commas? Do they have commas? Format as currency, format as percentage, decrease decimal. Sure. And then more formats. I don't want currency. Number. Yeah, I want number. Let's do number. There we go. 100 million. Okay. Let's say 10% of this are gay. Well, actually, let's go ahead and make it even easier. 90,000,000. 90 million are straight. 10,000,000 are gay. Okay. I'm going to show you this because it's actually very simple conceptually. And if you don't understand it after I explain it, I'm going to lose my fucking mind. So they said that the rate, because we should all understand the word rate, is double in the gay community compared to in the straight community. So let's just say, as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and look up how many domestic or percentage of domestic violence in US. Sure. In the United States, approximately 41% of women and 26% of men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Okay, so let's split this difference and let's just say 30%. Okay, so let's just use this let's just talk about domestic violence right now. Okay, so 30% of the straight people are going to experience domestic violence at some point in their lives. Okay, 90 million times 0.30 is 27 million. So 27 million people in the straight community are gonna experience domestic violence. Then they said that double the rate will experience domestic violence in the gay community. So 10 million multiplied by 0.6 is 6 million. Okay, so we can both see, because what Lance said here is that this number is bigger than this number. And anybody who's not an idiot goes, no shit. Okay, hold on. I didn't get that right. It was 6 million. Enter. Okay. So this number is bigger than this number because this is the straight people. This is the gay people. Okay. We all understand this, right? More straight people commit more domestic violence than gay people, right? But the rate is higher. So if the gay population was the same size as the straight population, you would need to multiply it by 9 in order to get the same number. Then the domestic violence rate would be equivalent to 54 million people being abused in the straight population. So it's effectively double. So what we can say here is that, yes, more straight people abuse their partners than gay people, but the rate at which gay people abuse their partners is more statistically significant. Therefore, if they were equivalent population sizes, then it would be roughly double that of the larger population. So this is a fucking problem that we should try to make it look more like this. If you don't understand it after I just broke this down for you, I don't know what to fucking do for you. This is so obvious to anybody who understands rates that whenever a progressive talks about, like, yes, more white people commit crime than black people, and it's like, no shit, 60% of the population is white. Please understand rate, or I will lose my fucking mind.
Does the author of you're asking if the author of an Atlantic piece gets to choose the photos? No,
I'm just asking if you had any editorial decision making. I'm just asking, this is not my line of work, right? So I'm having to ask you. But I'm curious.
So what happened here, unfortunately, was a trans model signed a release giving the editors permission to use their, I believe they used they them pronouns at the time and still do, to use their image on the cover. Then after the article came out and they were unhappy about it, they said that they had been lied to somehow, which I've never quite understood, because to me, if I sign a release saying you can use my photo in this, but if there's more to that story, you can let me know. But that a lot of people were complaining about that. I feel like that was unfair to the art department, who just like followed the rules completely and got a release from the model. But I don't know. I don't have anything to do with that decision because I'm a freelancer and a writer, not a photographer.
Right, absolutely. But so yeah. Just to be clear, it's he, him. So it uses he, him pronouns, and he was featured on the cover of the article. Do you not think it was unfair to him that, the way that the article used his photo and then said, your child says she's trans, she wants hormones and surgery, she's 13, that effectively not only misgendered him, but then outed him as being trans to his family through the process, something that's extremely dangerous for anyone who's LGBTQ+.
Do you think that if a trans person is in the closet and doesn't want to be outed, they should participate in a photo shoot about trans people?
That wasn't my question, though. Your answering question was a question. I'm just telling you the reality of what happened as a result of being in that photo shoot.
This person was outed against their will?
According to his testimony, yes.
I guess okay. So like, I look stereotypically Jewish. I have a big nose. You don't have to respond to that, but it's true. If I felt like I didn't want people to know I was Jewish and I signed my name to a form saying this is going to be a photo gallery of Jewish people, and then I complained this outed me as Jewish, that would seem pretty silly to me, because I signed a piece of paper saying I'm giving you permission to use me for this story about being Jewish. So I guess that's always confused me. I think maybe what this person should have done if they didn't want to be outed or weren't out is not participate in a photo shoot about trans youth, but I can't speak to their experience or his experience. I'm sorry.
So it's kind of a fuck around and find out scenario.
Fuck around in the sense of signing a thing saying I'm being photographed for a story about trans youth.
Okay.
Is that what you mean by fuck around? Well, actually, can I just ask you though, if you do you get what I'm saying? That like if you sign something saying I'm choosing to be featured in this magazine, I mean, what do you think should have happened?
I think that there's a large amount of people.
Yeah. Sorry, I need to pay attention to the content, or else chat is going to keep pissing me off. Lance is arguing that somebody who participated in an article about trans youth was outed as trans by the article. Why would you participate in an article and a photo shoot if you didn't expect it to be public? That's the point that Jesse Singal is making. and I think it's a valid point.
We're trying to get into a very difficult field such as modeling or anything related to that. And so if you sign up for something where it's like, hey, by the way, this is a casting call, we're going to be talking to different teens, their views on transition. And that's essentially what the casting call was, according to the article that was written about this. And in relation to that, they were not aware, when this was taking place, that, he was going to be used in this respect to be an article that is now considered to be highly controversial. And then
he was
the
aware,
end
though,
result
because
was
he
that
signed a release giving.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying that this is
permission.
illegal. That would be a different accusation, right? I'm saying, yeah, you signed a release. I mean, at the end of the day, the Atlantic had the legal rights to do with whatever they wanted with it, right? When I say
and morally, you have no claim if you sign a release and you're a legal adult saying you can use my photo for this. You have no moral claim if someone then uses your photo for it.
No, you can still criticize like morally if something was misused in a way that you didn't think was appropriate. However, you signed a legal release, then you can still make a moral claim. But I'm still with Jesse in this line of argumentation. You're an adult. If you want to be treated like an adult, you want to act like an adult, you want to claim adulthood, you want equal rights, you want equal this, equal that, then you have to act like an adult.
Right, but you don't think that it's at all unfortunate then? Maybe that's a way of putting it. That as a result.
I guess I'm curious how this person was outed by being on the cover. Do you have the backstory on that?
Yeah, so according to the article that's in them.us, Brewer's photo appeared on the cover to illustrate a story about Jesse Singal, a journalist who's covered the trans community in notably dishonest terms in the past. The cover line in Brewer's photo appeared next to "Your child says she's trans, she wants hormones and surgery, she's 13. Brewer told Pointner that he used they, them pronouns at the time, but now he uses he, him pronouns. That was 22 years ago. And it outed his gender identity to his immediate family and members before he felt ready to tell them. He didn't know much about the story that his photo would be used to illustrate. He'd originally responded to an open casting call by photographer so-and-so who was working for the New Yorker and the New York Times for a photo shoot on an article about gender dysphoria that was debating different views on teens wanting to transition.
Sorry, I'm sorry, current pronouns is he or they, he, right?
He, him, yeah.
Okay, so he signed a form saying, I'm participating in a photo shoot about teens seeking to transition, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We might have to agree to disagree on this one, because to me, if I sign a form saying I'm participating in a photo shoot about this sensitive issue, it just doesn't make sense to then say I was outed against my will. And I think that's really unfair to sort of the art folks at the Atlantic who that's a really tough story to illustrate. I have no idea how I would have done it, but I don't think they did anything wrong. But
they took a photo of him. They used the photo for the cover of the Atlantic. And then in that picture, right beside it, it says she wants hormones and surgery. She's 13. She was 22 at the time. Sorry, he was 22 at the time in this case. So he was 22 years old. But this front page now says she's 13. She wants hormone surgery right beside his photo. Right, which again, you don't think that it is all irresponsible to put that in giant words right beside his picture?
It's just I feel like there's a crossed wires here, because so if there's a photo about youth soccer in Time magazine and they get a bunch of kids and put them in a soccer uniform, those kids that no one looking at that is like, that's a real kid who actually plays soccer. You're modeling, you can use a model's image in a lot of ways. Your complaint is that it was inaccurate about their gender identity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, first off, I think like anyone looking at this cover.
So if it was inaccurate about their gender identity, couldn't they have just told their family, hey, I did a photo shoot and they didn't tell me how they were going to use the picture? Couldn't that have solved that issue? You're an adult. You signed the piece of paper. You did the photo shoot. Live with the consequences. This is moral frogging.
And especially if you're not familiar with this topic and you see his face and then you see the words, misgendering him and, saying that he's 13 years old. This implication is probably for some part of the story, one of the other people that you interviewed, because this person, he's not even featured in your article, right? But in so doing, that's part of the aspect that I think is also disingenuous. I understand.
Oftentimes a magazine cover will speak and sort of that's the kind of scenario the story's about. What do you do if your kid wants to go on hormones or get surgery?
Right. So and again, this is something that you have nothing to do with. You didn't pick the words that would appear on the cover of the Atlantic. That was their own editorial decision.
So you're just moral frogging about it because you want a moral frog. Got it. Thanks, Lance. Great content as always.
But it's just something that you also don't feel morally conflicted about because he had agreed to it.
I feel pissed off because it's fine if this person was unhappy with their decision to participate in the photo shoot, that's fine. I felt like the Atlantic got a little bit of a raw deal because they didn't do anything wrong, and I still haven't heard from you what they did wrong.
Well, I think the first thing that they did wrong was put in giant bold letters that, you know, he is a 13-year-old, he is a she, and that, again, anyone who's seen this cover, for example, if you were the family members of, like, his family, obviously, I suppose, according to him, saw this cover, recognized him, and then was like, whoa, that, you know, at the time he was going by they them, but now, you know, based on this cover, you know, it says that you're a 13-year-old who wants hormones and surgery, and it turns out that he in fact was trans and has undergone, you know, gender affirming care, but that was information that his family was not privy to. So your defense of that is just that he shouldn't have done the photo shoot in the first place then, if that was...
Oh, sorry, what information was his family not privy to?
The fact that he was trans.
So why are you participating in a photo shoot about trans people if you don't want your family to know that you're fucking trans, Lance? Listen, I'll say the thing that Jesse should be saying, okay? That's what Jesse should be saying. If you don't want to be known as trans, why are you participating in a photo shoot exclusively for a trans story? Obviously. It's so pedantic. It's not even pedantic. It's so paternalistic. Like, you can do everything that everybody else does, except for when you reap the consequences of your behavior, you have to hide behind your identity. This is why there is resentment against progressives. This is why there is resentment against people, cry bullies who cry foul in the gay community when they do shit like this. If you don't want to participate, don't fucking participate. If you do participate and you reap consequences, nobody feels bad for you. This applies to everything. This applies to everything and everyone at all times. Just because you're brown or Muslim or disabled or gay or trans and you reap the consequences of your behavior, nobody gives a shit. Welcome to being an adult, dumbass.
But he signed a release to be in
a photo shoot related to trans stuff. Yes. Go ahead and get pissed off, Jesse, and say you're a fucking idiot.
Dude, I'm sorry. I feel bad. Like, he signed a release saying I'm going to be in a photo shoot about trans kids. Right.
Right. So in that sense, it's on you, right? Like you made that decision.
Just own it, Jesse. You're being too nice. Say yes. They participated in a trans photo shoot. They knew it was going to be a trans photo shoot. They got outed to their own family. That's their fucking problem. If they didn't want to do it, then they shouldn't have signed the release and they shouldn't have participated in the photo shoot. Just say it.
That's what a photo release is. The reason to sign a photo release is to say I'm letting my photo out into the world. I think I got the sense he was unhappy with the article, which he has every right to be. But
well, I guess if you want to ask for an extreme comparison, if there was a photo shoot of, say, me and they used my photo and it was an interview where I was discussing, say, how much I hate white supremacists or white supremacism, and they used my picture on the cover, and then all of a sudden there was a quote beside it and it was like the leading white supremacists in Canada, but my picture was right there and I'm in the article speaking out against that, I would say that was a disingenuous way of using my photo, even though I'd signed a release form, even though I'd agreed to be a part of this photo shoot.
Hey, yes, we are fucking suffering. That's what we're doing.
They were manipulating the way my picture is now being perceived by the public.
I think your argument would be right.
Biz D says, I bet this argument goes really hard on Blue Sky.
If they had listed the model's name and if it wasn't like such an abstracted photo illustration. In your example, they're using you, Lance, like an actual but I will say, like, we should talk more about stuff I've actually written. But I'm happy to defend the decisions on this week. Yeah,
I can move on then. So I wanted to talk about the newer studies that have come out, because you said you've
Fine, I will Google the photo shoot. Jesse Singal, what is it? Jesse Singal detransition article?
Not heard of any studies that actually show that, you know, the rates of, you know, children who actually desist are low. This is something
Sorry, are we talking desistance or detransition?
Well, we can talk about both. We can talk about satisfaction rates for children who you know, transition, and at which point you know, how they feel and how much satisfaction they have, and how many of them actually choose to detransition. But this is something in which the overwhelming amount of data that has come out internationally from study after study on this topic shows very, very, very.
Which study? Don't. Okay, we've talked about this earlier. The Lazy Gardener and Decorative Scholarship. Which study and what do they say? if you're going to refer to things without understanding them, but then when challenged, you don't want to get into the weeds, then you are guilty of the lazy gardener. So, Lance, are you going to tell us which studies and what they say?
Very low rates of detransitioning, to the point where for someone to infer that they could be high or low, like, this is, again, not my area of expertise. This is something that you've written way more about than I have. But, you know, have you pulled up the levels of satisfaction and regret after gender affirming care in adolescence? 2024 U.S. study, which showed 97% continued access to gender affirming care, and their satisfaction rate was 6.5 out of 7 on an average of 6 to 10 years after transition.
Sure. So the problem here is there's also a study based on like U.S. military healthcare records where I forget the exact number. I'll include links to all these studies in our show notes. 25% had discontinued a few years later. And Kinnan McKinnon's point, this is this researcher who studies this stuff, is that depending on how you ask the question, you get a lot of different answers. And a lot of the studies saying a 1 or 2 or 3% regret rate only count kids who come back to the clinic and say, I transitioned, here I am. And that's, if a lot of them don't come back because they feel like they were burned by clinics that didn't give them good care. So I used to say, I cited this statistic that the desistance rate, not detransition, desistance is 80%. I no longer use that because I think there's a lot of fuzziness here. I just feel the same way about the detransition research. I think there's an article I'll include a link to, and this is just one person's opinion. It is a peer-reviewed article. The detransition rate is unknown. The author is Cohn, Archives of Sexual Behavior. That's my view, is the detransition rate is unknown. Because if I have 100 patients who come through my clinic, and 2 years later, I reach out to them and I get in touch with 50 of them, and they're all happy. That's not a 0% detransition rate. It's an I don't know detransition rate because I've lost track of 50 of them or 50% of them. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, if you don't know what happened,
I get what you're saying, but you immediately just took a peer-reviewed study that I was referencing, and this is a recent one. This one was from 2024 and discounted it just out of the gates and said, yeah, the truth is.
And told you why he discounted it. I am going to get increasingly pissed off as we continue to watch this. So the points, in case you're not tracking them, in case, like, you know, Lance has hurt you psychically so much that you're no longer able to like absorb new information. Jesse Singal's point is that when he's looked at the study's methodology, whenever they report a 97% satisfaction rate, those are only people who continue to show up to the clinic. However, there is a large population that stops showing up to the clinic and stops reporting about what's going on. And a lot of the detransitioners that he talked to didn't continue working with the clinic because they felt like they got burned by the clinic. So he's saying that the detransition rate is unknown. So we know there's 3%. We don't know if it's higher than that because of the people who stopped communicating with the clinics. Then desistance, he said he used to quote that desistance was as high as 88%. And that's because people can experience gender dysphoria at various times in life, most likely concentrated around puberty, okay? And desistance and detransition is not the same. Gender dysphoria desistance means that you feel weird about your body and you wonder whether or not you would be better off in a different trans identity as a result of your gender dysphoria. And then your gender dysphoria alleviates so you don't transition. That's desistance. Whereas detransition is you fully transition to a different identity, and then later on you're just like, oh, fuck, this was a mistake. So if we're going with a raw gender affirming model, then you might get people who would otherwise desist, but you basically affirm them into transitioning. And that is the exact anxiety that Jesse Singal is bringing up and is saying is a valid anxiety to have based off of the lack of good information. I'm gonna check in with chat because these people are pissing me off and I might have a stroke. Bull Media says children transitioning sounds so very wrong down the core of my being. It's like saying successful lobotomy. The Bull Media, I'm just going to give you the Steel Man. So the Steel Man is that if you have persistent gender dysphoria for a long time since childhood, then especially when it comes to males transitioning to women, the earlier the transition, like if you do it during adolescence, the more likely you are to have like a successful transition. Whereas if you allow somebody to go through a male puberty first, then they're going to take on a bunch of male secondary sex characteristics. And so as a result, the transition is not going to be as successful. So I'm trying to think, there's this girl, and I say girl, she was born male. Blair White, happy trans person interview. There's this girl that I'm trying to think if it's here. So Blair White is obviously like, you know, the conservative pick me when it comes to trans people, right? And if you go up to the top, there's Lily Tino, who I don't care who you are. Lily Tino is a piece of shit. Okay, Lily Tino is total psycho nut job. There's Dylan Mulvaney, who I would say is a weirdo, but you're allowed to be weird in the United States of America. Who cares? Then there's this girl who detransitioned. She went male trans, realized it was wrong, and then detransitioned. And then realistically, for Blair, it was almost simultaneously. There was an interview with a total passoid who transitioned when she was like 14 or 15. I'm actually going to scroll back to 5 years and see what's up and see if I can spot her real quick. But there was this girl who transitioned at 13 or 14. And she was like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm trans. I have a straight boyfriend right now. I'm living my best life, blah, blah, blah. But she transitioned when she was like 13 or 14. And the surgeries went good. And she had plenty of money for surgery. And she obviously has like rich, progressive parents. I'm looking to see if I can just spot her through a scroll. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. But it was an interview, and you would not be able to recognize this girl as trans because she transitioned so early. I don't think I'm going to be able to spot her. I'll check the live section real quick. But the point is that there are people who transition and they're total passoids. Anyways, who is JBP? Jordan Peterson. General So says, I find it hard to believe that a 13-year-old even would be able to sign a modeling release form. Well, she was 22. She just looked young. We pulled her up earlier. She just looks young. Imagine, or I guess it's a he, him now. So he looked young. Randy Chang says, imagine what life must be like in 2025 for a non-political trans person. Everyone wants to use you as a lever. Yep. That dude is a cutie for real, for real. Yep. Jonah Zola says, has JBP ever had a combo with JBP? That'd be pretty funny. I think, yeah, there's Jordan Peterson versus Jordan Peterson clips. They're awesome. Hey, Connor, Lance can't hear you. Yeah, I wish he could because he's a fucking idiot. All right. Anyways, I guess back to it.
Is that, hey, by the way, there's another study that shows, you know, if we interview military personnel, that this is just not the case. That's one of, again, many studies that you can pull up. There's re-identification.
No, KO Day brings up a good point. I may be strawmanning here. A big hypocrisy I see sometimes is the idea that gender is a social construct, but somehow a trans person can't be trans because of social pressure. I would say that most progressives will just they might acknowledge that social pressure could be a thing, but they think that that is used as cover for bigotry against trans people. I think any sane progressive would admit that, but Lance can't be sane because he's a progressive on the internet. So he has to say the craziest, most fucked up, dumb position possible.
With birth registered sex in Western Australian pediatric gender clinic cohort. This was an Australian study of 552 patients.
LB says kids. I thought he said a military study. Yes, the Department of Defense has health care that's for the families of military people. Military people have families.
They showed 1% of trans youth re-identified with their sex assigned at birth, 4% re-identified during mental health assessments period or earlier did not proceed with gender-affirming care. There's also a more nuanced story. The pediatric gender-affirming healthcare is associated with satisfaction and confidence from 2024. This one, once again, 88% expressed satisfaction, 86.7% felt confident out of 141 on hormones. Only one person, sorry, I want to finish saying this because I think it's important for your audience. Only one person, 0.7%, regretted both hormone therapy and.
Did this somehow debunk what Jesse said, or are you just repeating the stats because you don't understand what words mean?
Surgery. Now, for longitudinal studies, which is something that I know you've often asked about as well, there's the gender identity 5 years.
Whatever 4690 says, is Trump wrong for making trans people go to prisons of their born sex? If they're in isolation, I don't care. So whatever 4690, obviously prison is a hellhole, and homosexual rape in prison, they call it like institutionalized homosexuality. It's very normal in prison, allegedly, for rape to be used as a tool of power and sexual gratification, et cetera, et cetera. And so the fear is that if trans people are put in Gen Pop, like if male trans people who are intact and have penises and who don't modify their testosterone and maybe they're accused of sex crimes, that they might abuse female inmates. And then it's also worrisome for male trans people to be put into male prison, because then they're obviously going to be, if they're feminine, they're probably going to be disproportionately targeted for rape, right? So the fear is that you're not protecting these populations, you're basically exposing them both to rape. So what I would say is, if there was a trans person who had genital reassignment surgery, who had FFS and was on estrogen and had reliable access to estrogen and had estrogen levels in line with normal, in line with the female population, then I would say, who gives a shit, send them in there. If they're intact, they're not on hormones, and they just identify as a woman or whatever, then I would say put them in some kind of like segregation unit. And same thing with female trans men who might get like raped. Wait, hold on. Female trans men would be in the women's pod. I'm not too worried about them. The males in the female pen, you might need to segregate. And then sorry, I'm getting lost. Males in the, do you know what I'm saying? No, I'm totally fucking it up. Pause, reset. Everybody reset your brains. I'm insufficiently caffeinated, I'm tired, and Lance is giving me fucking headaches. So if you take an assigned female at birth man and you put them in the female pod, I think they'll be okay, because they don't have a penis, they can't impregnate people, and let's face it, they have the same physical capacities as a butch lesbian. So I don't think that a man who was assigned female at birth is going to be that big of a problem in the women's prison. When it comes to somebody with a penis, an assigned male at birth trans person being sent into the male pod, I think the worry is that they're going to be disproportionately targeted for rape. So if any problems manifest, then there should be another pod for segregation, where basically if somebody is disproportionately likely to be a perpetrator or victim of sex abuse, they should be segregated and they should be controlled in such a way that that sex abuse doesn't occur. I think the sentences I just said were approximately in English, and I think they made sense.
After social transition, this one was 2022 in the US, which included 317 youth, 208 trans girls, 109 trans boys, and I think this is one of the ones that you personally critiqued, but 94% maintained their gender identity without regret.
BizD says, who said they felt it since childhood? There are people who experience gender dysphoria since childhood.
Without regret, 3.5 became non-binary, and only 2.5 reverted back to being cis. And of all these studies, the reason that is often given for people who do detransition.
Sorry. Bull Media says, Connor, I appreciate the steel man, but nobody knows what the fuck gender is, trans means anymore. Your two boys would be trans if you caught them watching Sailor Moon or any girl shit. No, because I'm not dumb. So when my kids, you know what's funny? My boys do some feminine things, but what's so funny about it is they do it and then they immediately do a masculine thing. So for instance, my boys are disproportionately sweet. They're very nice. They're very temperamentally nice, and they will cuddle baby dolls. And my mom will be, or not my mom and my wife will be like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And I think if I was a giga progressive, maybe I'd be like, "Oh man, maybe they're trans. Maybe I could get brownie points, right?" But then what my sons will do when they were babies is immediately after hugging the baby doll, they will use the baby doll as a hammer to smash another toy in a direction that they want to go. So they'll be like, boom, like, you know the meme, hit a motherfucker with another motherfucker? You ever seen that? Hit a mother with another mother. So my kids will cuddle a baby doll, and then they'll do this meme. So I think we're good, to be honest. I don't think my kids are trans.
Or even in desistance cases, is social stigma, the social stigma that's applied to this. Now, I think one of the
I actually need to half listen to the content while I continue to read chat.
problems you have when people want to go back and forth on the data, and even if it's someone like me who wants to, exclusively refer to peer-reviewed studies only, is that you can look at meta-analysis of the studies. You can look at pooling of the studies, right? Like there's the regret after gender affirmation study, the systematic review. That one analyzes 27 studies.
You mean the one in the journal of? Sorry, it analyzed how many?
This one analyzes 27 studies, pooling 7,000.
Sorry, chat keeps being interesting again, so they keep interrupting the content. Stop being interesting, chat. So Blair White has fully transitioned, and you say, shouldn't we just give them therapy so they don't want to be trans anymore? I don't think I give a shit. If Blair White is happy as a woman and she transitioned and got FFS and she's happy, I don't give a fuck. Same thing with Taftaj. I hope she doesn't mind me using her. I'm friends with Taftaj. So if Taftaj, to my knowledge, was born male. Like this is Taftaj before, but she has been on estrogen for a really long time. And I think she's had gender affirming surgeries. And so if Taftaj is happy being a fucking woman, guess what? I don't give a shit. God bless her. Go live your fucking best life. Okay? I really don't care. Okay, so sorry.
928 trans internationally, and
yeah, so
that study, the majority of them are on adults.
Hey, I feel bad, but I'm not like the talking over me. Let me just, because I'm very familiar with these studies. So the one you just mentioned,
sure.
They doubled their sample size through an error. Their sample size was 50% high. Let me pull up the actual. This is Bustos et al., right? Yeah, regret after gender affirmation surgery, a systematic review of meta-analysis of prevalence.
Yes, it's Bustos.
This was a study, I've written about it.
Sure.
I forget the exact, they basically doubled their sample size because they did not correctly transfer the data from the studies they were looking at into their meta-analysis. And to this day, there's this team, I think it's one psychiatrist in Australia and a few researchers in London or thereabouts who've been trying to get them to correct the numerous errors with it. Now, even if I've written about this study in particular, even if you accepted their claims at face value, the overall loss to follow-up rate was 40%. So there's two things here. If this was a great meta-analysis, we would still not know what happened to 40% of the participants, but they just won't correct their errors. There's sort of a long paper trail. And unfortunately, I found this, like, before I got into the gender stuff, I wrote a whole book about other sort of popular science ideas where there was very little accountability and researchers don't correct their errors. And it's just, science is in a bad place right now. It isn't just youth gender medicine, but I would just make 2 points. One of which is this is the single most viral study on the regret question, despite having all sorts of uncorrected errors. And if the overall loss to follow-up rate is 40%, that means you don't know. So the Australian study you just mentioned, you probably don't know. I don't think what's the loss to follow-up rate? Do you know that?
No.
Is this the one in which, so there's
this
a
is the
difference
one you brought
between
up from the Australian clinic?
Yeah. So in that case, when you're saying there's a loss of 40% of the people who return to ask the questions, right? That doesn't mean that you can classify them as desisters or detransitioners.
He's not saying that. He's saying that the data is bad. we're still arguing about this. I've been paying attention more to chat, so I didn't realize we were still arguing about this. That's Jesse's point, dumbass.
Or simply,
No. What I'm saying is, if you lost to follow up just means you don't know. I don't know like how many of them detransitioned or desisted. But the point is, if you've lost 40% of your sample, and I don't, in the Australian one you brought up as a 2024 one, do you know what the loss to follow up rate in that one is?
Of course he doesn't, because Lance doesn't know how to read.
No, I don't have the data.
Okay.
So you don't know either, Lance.
And so again, this is like,
You're talking about 2024 re-identification with birth registered sex in Western Australian pediatric gender clinic cohort.
It's the one you mentioned as an example of how.
Yeah, the one that you're
is.
invoking that I invoked, that would be the one from 2024. So
Okay.
I
would just say it's probably.
Regardless of whether or not he knows the specific study, if you don't know that data point, then he still has a point, Lance. You muppet.
Probably important to know what the loss to follow-up rate is. Now, I think the Dutch have probably done the best job. They have a couple of studies where people who go through this pretty intensive diagnostic process where, like, I think trans activists think it's too harsh, but it's like if you have a lot of other mental health comorbidities, they don't let you transition. I think they've done a couple studies where like loss to follow-up isn't too high. And if you go through this strict process, yeah, the outcomes appear to be pretty good. But I don't know how things are going in Canada. In the US, we have a totally different protocol where a lot of clinics are not doing a lot of gatekeeping. And I guess that's what worries me, because I don't think there would be much of a story here if, like, in every case of a young person getting hormones or surgeries or blockers, there'd been an extensive assessment period. But we know from Reuters reporting, from a little bit of my reporting, that's not the norm. So that's what I'm worried about, and that's why I think like it's important to dig into these regret studies and say, if you have kids coming through your clinic and you're giving them major medical treatments, and then 40% of them disappear, and I'm 40%, it's usually lower than that, but 30%, and you can't follow up with them, how can you say it's a successful treatment or that they're happy? You don't know that. So that's why I say the detransition rate, in my view, is unknown. I would not say it's super high, which some gender critical activists do, just because the detransition subreddit is getting bigger. That doesn't tell us it's high. I have no confidence it's low, because every time I've looked at a study that seems to say it's low, it has what to me are pretty major problems.
So speaking about the United States, again, yeah, I think you are very...
Okay. I'm desperately going to try to pay attention to see if Lance has absorbed any of this information and is moving to a new point. If he's not moving to a new point, I will fast forward him. As far as I know, I've been in like a 10 to 20 minute haze where I've been half paying attention to the content and I've been arguing with chat. And effectively what's been happening for the past 10 to 20 minutes is that Singal has said, I don't know what the desistance rate is, allegedly as high as 80%, but I don't know that for a fact. So that's something we should consider when we're talking about gender affirming care. And in reference to detransition, we just don't know, because half of trans people just stop showing up to clinics and stop answering their phone. So until we have better data, we just don't know. And Lance is saying, yeah, but did you know that it was as low as 2 or 3%? And then Jesse is saying, you don't know that it's as low as 2 or 3% because half of people stopped showing up. If they circle the wagons one more time, I'm going to fast forward them 10 minutes.
Good at pulling apart, the small specific.
Sorry. And then Tagrung says, I think if I think I'm a worm, removing my arms and legs early in life is affirming care that limits my exposure to the fact that I'm a primate. So what Vlad Darius Serbin says is that Tagrung, from the limited research I've read, seems like gender affirming care to alleviate some of the dysphoria, but the research is limited until better ones seem like a decent thing right now. Vlad is saying the Jesse Singal point, but AF Racing has an even better point, which is said that Tagrung, we would love you even if you were a worm.
These bards about individual studies and going back and forth. Have you mentioned that conclusively every major medical association in the United States agrees upon gender affirming care, that it's a valid form of health care, and that it should be acceptable for doctors to use? And the same applies to Canada. Every major medical association in Canada strongly supports gender affirming care, including access to puberty blockers and hormones.
Well, I mean, first of all, that's not true, because the American Academy of Pediatrics is doing a new systematic review.
It's 100% true.
What do you...
No, it's not. if he just said that a major medical organization that actually is oh, fuck you, Lance.
I'm sorry. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the Endocrine Society, Pediatric Endocrine Society, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the National Association of Social Workers, and American College of
and watch Jesse Singal make the exact same point when Lance is done talking about it.
Obstetricians and gynecologists. They all have statements that are still available on their websites. Now, that could change, as you're suggesting right now. The American Academy of Pediatrics could change their stance on that. But as of right now, every major medical association in the United States agrees and strongly supports gender-affirming care.
They don't strongly support it. So they all use different language. Some of them will say, like, in the case of well-assessed youth or something like that. In the case of the AAP, they put out a 2018 policy statement where this one guy, Jason Rafferty, he wrote it. And usually when you have a statement from a medical group, you want it to be like the statement of the whole group, right? Not just one guy or like a committee. So this was an unusual case where one guy wrote it. It says at the bottom, this is his responsibility and his responsibility alone. And it's a strange statement that I think has a lot of inaccuracies. Now, I know that in your world, the CAS review has been debunked, which I just think is wrong. I've written about that. The CAS review, one of the useful things it did was look at the existing standards put out by these groups. And it basically just showed that there's not a good scientific process underlying these statements. And I think in some cases, there's a case to be made that there's been political pressure. In the case of WPATH, we know from documents that fell out of these court cases that there was political pressure. So I think you're too trusting of the medical establishment because like they're not purely scientific groups. Like what some of the American Medical Association and groups like it have been against Medicare for all. They've been in favor of these ridiculous laws that make it hard for like Indian doctors to come over here and practice. So they're not right about everything. Like I'm guessing you are for Medicare for all, right?
I think you've changed the topic like 3 times in one sentence.
No, he didn't, you fucking idiot. Sorry. Like, re-summarizing Jesse Singal, this is the difference between being bad faith and being genuinely stupid, okay? Lance thinks that Jesse Singal has brought up 3 points because he's being bad faith. But what Jesse Singal brought up is actually a direct response to what Lance said. He said that, like, Lance made a statement. And that statement was the vast majority of psychological and endocrinological and medical associations endorse gender affirming care. And what Jesse Singal said, well, actually, if you look at the verbiage that these medical associations use, they're not flat out endorsing gender affirming care. They have caveats within their statements, like they say, in well-assessed youth. And well-assessed is not established. We don't know what well-assessed means, okay? So we need to argue about what well-assessed means. Is it 2 years? Is it 6 months? Is it one consultation? We need to argue about what well-assessed means. That was his number 1 point. Number 2, he was saying that one of the major organizations that is often cited in reference to this research is reassessing the protocol. So since 2018, they have gone back and said, hey, we actually don't have a lot of good information in reference to this, so we're going to start from scratch. That's also what I heard happened with the CAS review in the United Kingdom, is that the National Health Service, whatever their universal healthcare system is, basically said that, like, we're starting from scratch in reference to gender care for teenagers, right? And kids. So those are 2 major medical organizations who have backtracked from the position that Lance is saying is settled science, quote unquote. Then on top of that, he said, hey, surely you don't trust every medical association about every single topic, because as an example, here's a medical association that you're currently citing that's doing weirdly political shit in reference to 2 topics. And you agree with my position on these 2 topics. So clearly you don't trust this medical association at all times. Lance is literally I'm not even fully paying attention, and I understand what Jesse said more than Lance. LB makes another claim that I have to verify. How common is sexual assault in women's prison? How common is sexual assault? A study discussed by the National Institute of Health found that the rates of inmate-on-inmate sexual victimization were highest for female inmates, 212 per 100,000, more than 4 times higher than for male inmates, 43 per 100,000. So, LB, you're fucking wrong again. Please stop pissing me off. And that's because women are not doing penetrative sex, but they're still sexually assaulting each other. Probably with fingers, right? So more women are being grabbed in their crotch area than men are being assaulted in prison. However, with men, there's probably the shame of sexual stigma, and it's also penetrative sex. And I'm just going to tell you, if somebody tries to do penetrative sex to me, I'm going to fucking snap that thing off like a celery stalk and throw it into tall grass. All right? So again, wrong.
You're trying to just deviate away from the fact that every single medical association in the United States agrees upon this. You can start to poke holes in that by saying that their statement isn't as strong as you feel it is, but that is just a universal fact right now, as of our recording, that every single major medical association in the United States agrees upon this. Now, if you want to talk about the cast, if you want to talk about the cast review, we can eventually get to that, because again, I want to talk about this in terms of like, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a scientist, right? Yeah. So I have to actually.
And Jesse has done more research than you, so you're getting mogged, even though I'm sure your chat loves you.
You look this stuff up, but this is universal as well within Canada. If you're not aware, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Psychological Association, and the Canadian Psychiatric Association all agree that, again, they.
And this isn't addressing the points being made. I swear to God. Smooth brain meme times. Holy shit. This is Lance. Bumpy, weird, gross wrinkles, ugly, thinks equals sad. My brain, smooth, no wrinkles, cute, can't think equals no sad. Insult me all you wish. My brain is too smooth. The smoothest there is. Your words simply slide right off. Now, here's the problem, though, is that information slides right off of Lance's brain. Here's Jesse Singal's point. It smacks the front of Lance's forehead, and then it just gently slides right off. I'm going to give Lance like another 5 to 10 minutes in order to like try to absorb some information. And then I think we're moving to the next segment, because this is pissing me off. I'm not going to lie.
Support gender affirming care, including the use of puberty blockers and hormones.
I'm going to listen to Jesse Singal reiterate his argument and Lance ignore it.
For youth. That's the totality of the major medical associations that would determine whether or not this should be safe for children to do.
So let's stick to the Canadian ones, which you're probably more familiar with. When you say they support it, do they support it like an informed consent model or lengthy assessment? What exactly are they in favor of?
Guess what? Lance is not going to know.
So I wrote down a little paragraph on each one of their endorsements. So the Canadian Pediatric Society recommends gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy, under informed consent models. The Canadian Medical Association endorses access to gender-affirming care and opposes bans or political interference. The Canadian Psychological Association supports affirming care and mental health support for trans youth. And the Canadian Psychiatric Association affirms that gender-affirming care is evidence-based and medically appropriate.
So the first one you mentioned, is that informed consent for young people or for adults? Yes, informed consent model. For who? Adults or young people?
Both.
Both. Okay. So that means like if a 13-year-old comes into a clinic and wants hormones, they should just get hormones.
No, not at all.
If they sign the consent, if they sign the consent form.
You've spoken about the DSM-5 before, right? You're aware of how the system itself works.
No, informed consent. The whole point of informed consent is there's not gatekeeping. That's what informed consent is. If you're told the risks and benefits of this treatment, you can consent to it. You can fill out a form.
Right. But in the case of you saying,
just watch the information just slide right over his smooth brain. Just watch it.
And that like you could just walk into a door and walk out with puberty blockers. That's not how someone would be diagnosed with gender dysphoria.
But under the informed consent model, it doesn't matter what their diagnosis is. The point is informed consent.
Absolutely, it does. Sorry, how do you think the DSM-5 works? Do you think that people simply walk into the clinic?
I love how he's laughing smugly when Jesse Singal obviously understands more.
and they say, I like girls, but I want to dress up like a boy. And then they're like, okay, here's hormones.
Do you know what informed consent means?
But
in this
no,
context?
now you're backtracking. Again, this
Well,
goes
just
back
tell
to,
me, yes or no. Do you know what informed consent means?
Jesse, specific.
Answer the question yes or no. If you don't answer the question yes or no, you're being viewed as evasive and a fucking worm. We've talked about worms earlier in this content. Lance is a fucking worm.
Specifically,
Okay.
when it comes to how they actually walk into these clinics that are treated, neither of us are doctors, right?
Yeah, but Jesse has been you don't need to be a doctor in order to research different medical models, you fucking idiot. I'm sorry I'm getting pissed off. I'm sorry I'm getting profane, but this is actually like I'm reaching my limit of stupidity that I can absorb from Lance. So I'm going to go ahead and let this back and forth play out, and then I'm going to wrap and move to the next segment.
So in what world does that work?
Do you know what informed consent means? Because this is important to the point I'm trying to make.
We've already defined informed consent.
What does it mean?
Recommends gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormones therapy, under the informed consent models.
Okay.
So what is the informed consent model, you smooth-brained worm?
You're Googling informed consent model. What do you find?
No, I'm opening up their website because I want to get to it.
Okay. You don't know, dude. Just say it's. You're not.
In 60 years,
you know a lot of.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think you don't know what informed consent means, and that's causing a roadblock in the conversation. Under an informed consent model for youth, if that's what this group supports, a 13-year-old, if they're informed of the costs of the potential harms and benefits of the treatment, a 13-year-old can go on hormones right away. That's what informed consent means in the context of transgender healthcare.
No, they would still.
And it could be you're in favor of that.
They would still need. No, Jesse, they would still need to actually be determined. Sorry, a doctor would still need to be determining whether or not that individual actually, in fact, has the 5 of the 7.
No, that's
qualifications.
Gatekeeping. The whole point of informed consent is it was a response to gatekeeping, because for decades, trans adults felt like doctors were poking and prodding them and asking personal questions. Informed consent was an alternative to that, where the doctor says, here's what the hormones will do. Here are the potential downsides. Right. Sign this form and we'll give them to you. So that's why informed consent clinics are so popular, including at some of our Planned Parenthoods in the States.
But then what I don't understand what your problem is with that then.
With a third.
Sorry. Lance just actually within 20 seconds did the "that's not happening, it's good it's happening" meme. Within 20 seconds. Okay. Let's just finish up this exchange. Don't have a stroke. Don't have a stroke. Don't have a stroke. Don't have a stroke.
13-year-old being able to walk in and get hormones?
But they wouldn't be able to. Under informed consent models.
If under informed.
Okay, he actually just doesn't understand. He actually just doesn't understand words. I knew this content I knew this content was going to be dog shit from the perspective of actually understanding complex ideas. I knew it was going to be fire from the perspective that Lance is a fucking idiot, and therefore he's just going to get mogged for the entire time that I'm watching it. So Vinny says 23 minutes in, and Jesse is an insufferable grifter who is absolutely unwilling to listen or concede to anything. Peter Peel pays them damn good. Bruh. These people, anybody who thinks that Lance did well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you got 80 IQ. So, sorry. Let's go ahead and do a nice little closer on that, and then let's move into the next piece of content. So anyways, as predicted, Lance from the Serfs is incapable of receiving new information. He is only capable of constantly reciting the information that he read aggressively. Jesse Singal, this is the lazy gardener. Jesse Singal followed up with him in various questions, and I'm just going to cite to you the most recent example. Do you know what informed consent is? Lance did not know, but acted incredulous when Jesse Singal described the process to him. Then, once he agreed that that was the process that 13-year-olds were under, where they don't need a diagnosis because previously they had been gatekept from meds, so informed consent is an alternative model. Somebody who does not have a diagnosis, who does not have a psychiatrist 2 years of evaluation, who doesn't have to do any kind of gatekeeping, can walk in and say, yes, I know the risks, therefore I'm going to engage in the treatment. And within 15 seconds, Lance went from that's not how this works to why do you care that this is how it works? He's actually too stupid to be a political commentator. I'm going to engage with chat and move into the next segment. That was very psychologically painful. Cameron Mosley says, why would anyone be a communist in the modern day unless they don't know any better? Because we're just here to suffer.